Welcome to the Tokenomics DAO podcast, where we explore everything tokenomics related, ranging from deep dives on the tokenomics of the newest protocol to demystifying the nuance of building a successful token ecosystem. Our goal is to bring awareness to the importance of tokenomics and the crucial role it plays in defining the success of a protocol, helping make tokenomics relevant for everyone, builders and investors alike. I'm your host, Flo, joined by my co-hosts, Jason and or Lovis. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome to episode 25 of the Tokenomics DAO podcast. Today, I'm going to play interviewer to Flo and Mason. We recently just launched the Tokenomics Design Framework in the DAO, in the Tokenomics DAO, and these two have been doing 99% of the work creating it. So I wanted to get on here and basically give them a chance to explain to us what this is, why we created it, and how it's useful. And that's why we're doing like kind of this interview format. I'm just trying to play dumb and ask them a bunch of questions about it. Welcome, guys.
Yeah, cool.
Good to be here.
I'm excited.
So let's jump in. So what is this? We call it TDF for short, the Tokenomics Design Framework. People might have heard
For lack of
about
better
it
naming
already.
options. But yeah, I think like it sort of describes it, and it is a framework that helps you to DIY your tokenomics. And that's really super short. That's what the goal is. We found that something like that didn't exist. And so, yeah, that's really what we try to create, so that everybody who, and we see this a lot when people reach out to us for consulting or for help, and we tell them, hey, it's quite the process, right? And if you want to sign up for premium consulting, then that's not gonna, you're not gonna get away with $1,000 for that. And that's why a lot of them then go ahead and try to DIY their tokenomics with mixed results, I guess. It's not always that successful. And so since they're doing it themselves anyway, we thought like we're just giving them something so that the outcome might get better. And so this is an MVP. This is MVP 1. We just thought we're going to get something out and then iterate based on that. So living document.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
And like adding to that, there's also this level of whenever we do get, for example, people coming to us asking for advice, a lot of this stuff, as in they have to go through it anyway, as in all the information is going to come from them, right? So it's just one barrier for us having to say, okay, well, I mean, you're gonna have to look at this, then maybe think about this. So having sort of a framework for them to go through beforehand is just going to make things a lot more efficient for them and for us, right? And get us to where we want to be.
Yeah, I think that's like a huge bonus, right? Because we're going to use this ourselves, and we've done so in different versions, right? We've used like maybe the first alpha version to design or think about our own token, and then we use different versions with different clients, and so this is going to help us a lot too. And so we're really going to let every contributor that gets into consulting use this with clients. Even if we do the whole consulting thing, we're going to use this, because I really think if we use this as much as possible, it's going to get better.
Right. Well, so basically we're trying to build tools, right, in this DAO to help people break down tokenomics. But of course, we're making them from the experience that we collect along the way, doing the work ourselves. And so you said this is an MVP, so minimal viable product, right? But towards what? Like, can you say a little bit about the bigger vision?
Yeah. So the name, and that's what you can see on the website. We called it the Tokenomics Hub, and I guess we have multiple ideas on where we can, or where we want to take this. Currently, the Tokenomics Hub, we're building this out for builders specifically. So this is really targeted at people that are building their tokenomics. We have some ideas on doing something for investors too, because I think a lot of the stuff that we publish on Substack is not only interesting for builders, but also for investors. And really, if you think about it a little bit deeper and you look at the Tokenomics Design Framework, you'll quickly see that it's like you can just ask the questions slightly different and then you'll find out if the tokenomics were designed properly. And that will help you as an investor too. But this is really for builders, and it all comes together under the what we call the Tokenomics Hub. And yeah, Figma we'll start with. We're thinking of maybe putting this into our own portal at a later stage. But first, we really want to we have like 4 different topics that we want to cover MVP wise first. That's this design. That's like the whole process of designing a token. The second one will be review, because you get that question a lot. Like people have created something with their token and then don't know how to review it. And so it's pretty much just using the design, but with different angles to have a look at it, right? So we maybe start with the demand drivers, or start with the value creation or the business model, and guide them through slightly differently. That's one thing. The third would be post-launch. So there's obviously lots of tokens out there that have already launched and might want a review of their token. So on episode 23, I think, we've talked about that with Bankless DAO, because they have a tokenomics department, and it's quite interesting what they do, right? They have like a whole department that takes care of that, and they go through this, talk to others what they could improve, innovate on with their token, and then they make proposals within the DAO. So we think that we can help them too in going through this whole process, in updating tokenomics that are already live. And then other things that we do typically in consulting engagements, you, Lovis, you've done one of these, right? Where like a traditional corporation or a Web2 company comes to us and is interested in thinking through if it would make sense for them to get onto this Web3 token topic. And so this is more like an exploration type. So we have some ideas for that too. So that's kind of like the midterm where we want to take the Tokenomics Hub.
Okay, so design, review, post-launch kind of review / recommendation, and then this whole ideation / exploration topic, right? So these are the 4 big ones
Exactly.
that we're going to attack here for the Tokenomics Hub. And so the Tokenomics Design Framework is kind of the first step on that first part of that list, basically. Cool. Well, let's jump in, right? So the framework has a really nice structure. Also outlined it very well on the Twitter thread that we posted. I don't know where it's at, like 1,200 likes or something. We're super happy about that. But yeah, could you just talk us through? Should I share my screen maybe so we can see the points, or do you want to share it?
Yeah, I can do it.
I can do it here. Boom.
Okay.
Brilliant. So it starts up here. So you kind of give the intro already, right? So this is the Tokenomics Design Framework overview.
And maybe just one thing for that, while we're there, right? You see this need help, and of course we want to some degree also pay our contributors, and we don't want to stop doing consulting and providing our expertise. So we just thought of this way to start with that, right? The whole design framework is free, right? You can download the FigJam file that we have. You can use it. There's no costs with that at all. But if you kind of want to get some help, like chat with us on our Discord server with experts or contributors from our DAO that we've vetted, and that they've done consulting projects and they've written articles, then they have seen a bunch of projects. So we have a tier for that at $50 per month, and a couple of others, or 2 others, Navigator and Frontier, as we call them. Navigator would really be lower touch, but more than Discord, right? We'd have conversations with you guys, Q&A in that channel, and chats and like comments. And then we'll have a more hands-on approach, Frontier, where we'd really have a dedicated contributor that takes care of the client or of the person going through the Tokenomics Design Framework and helping out to flesh this all out, with weekly meetings, weekly calls to ask questions, discuss stuff. So yeah, that's kind of what we're thinking of in terms, like, if you're stuck or you need help, there's like 3 different options that we have.
Perfect. And so, as you said, the framework is free. Basically, it gives everybody a chance to walk through by themselves, maybe also in preparation of then doing approaching consulting but of course you can use it and apply it as is, right? So maybe people will not use help, or maybe they've already created their own stuff and this is a good sanity check
Fine,
they
yeah.
can walk
Yeah.
through, right?
Yeah. Totally fine, yeah. So we've got the business assessment. We really think it's super important to start with that, because the token is not the business, and in most cases there should be something underlying whatever you need a token for. So there needs to be some problem that you're solving, and that's where we're starting, right? We're starting with this problem statement where we say, or where we ask a couple of questions, right? What's the problem you're solving? How does your project approach and go about solving that problem? And then we've got a bunch of resources you can read through, and this is kind of how this framework works. So we thought this would be a good way to start, right? To go into the business first, and then using FigJam to the right. So this is just like a little screenshot that from the Twitter thread, but in the real framework, we'll then kind of have like a box where you can put in sticky notes and examples. Yeah, I can send you a link if you want.
It's better if we're in there,
it's also
right?
on the website. If you just go to the website.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that's really good, right? If you want to get the FigJam file and don't want to wait until the end of the podcast or click on the link, if you just go to tokenomicsdao.xyz and then click on Tokenomics Hub, there is a link that should take you to Figma, where you can get a copy of the framework, right? So and that's, I think it's really cool that we have used Figma for it, because it's a great tool for just that. Because then you can basically clone this complete thing as a template, and then you can share that with your team. You could share that with us, and you can collaborate on it, right? So you can add your sticky notes, you can add your stuff to it, and add comments. Like the comments features in this are pretty cool too.
Yeah, I mean, people just saw me literally walk through the process of getting it, right? It's super straightforward. I actually I have a Figma account, and of course I already have it in there. I just use different browsers. That's why I have to go through the sign up again. But anyway, yeah, so this Figma or FigJam is like one of these infinity whiteboard tools, right? So it's super easy to use. You can, zoom in wherever you want, scroll around, fly around. But anyway, you have here, what you were saying is you have your instructions and your video even embedded over here, and then you have your work area where you can even see an example, and maybe we can talk through that here in a second. And then you can get to work right away, and you can even collaborate with people on your own board, right? So that's really cool.
Yeah, so I could now join. Lovis could send me his file to Mason and myself, and then we could add notes to that, like completely asynchronously. I could start tomorrow morning while Lovis is still asleep and get this all sorted out, and he could come in, review that, use the comment feature to add comments, and we could discuss stuff. So I think it's really, really cool, especially if you have teams that work remote, are in different locations, to really share this. Time zones, yeah. I found that really cool when we created it, Mason, when we had like a call. Usually we have like these like this is my evening now, right? It's like it's like 7:30 p.m. And so we'd have a chat about what we wanted to do. And then I'd go to bed sometime, and then you could just like get to work on this. And so, the next morning I wake up and it's like halfway done, and I could then go, and then we could have another chat in the next, in the evening. So that was kind of nice.
And it was good because like we didn't step on each other's toes in that regard, as in as you went to bed I worked, and as I went to bed you worked.
Yeah, but even if you do like work with this tool, with this file, I'm not trying to shill Figma here, but even if you do work in the same file, and probably Miro is the same. There's a whole bunch of others. Who cares? But even if you do, it still synchronizes everything super nicely.
Yeah.
Like you can't mess up here. There's no, yeah, yeah. Like 5 years ago when you used Word, and it was sort of on SharePoint, you'd always end up with this situation where it was like you had like 100 copies and stuff was broken, and you went through the pain of synchronizing them back together. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it is really seamless, as in working multiple people at the same time.
yeah.
Yeah, so we have the Uniswap example on here. Do you guys, maybe Mason, can you talk us through that a little bit for the first part here, or?
Yeah, sure. So I guess this first part is sort of getting, like we said, an idea of the business itself rather than directly thinking about a token, right? Because as Flo mentioned, I mean, tokens don't solve problems. They sort of just like amplify things, so to speak. So I guess what is, I guess, the inherent demand for the product, right? What is it solving is like its problem statement, right? So in the case of Uniswap, it's to swap tokens in a decentralized non-custodial manner, right? And obviously back in the day, that was very desirable because before Uniswap, there wasn't many ways to sort of do that, right? And then just like, and I didn't know, I guess the way it works is using an automated market maker, right, model. So I guess that's sort of like the problem it's solving, and that's the inherent demand, I guess, in my opinion. And that can obviously be done without a token, as we saw for many years with Uniswap.
Yeah,
right,
they didn't even have a token for that, right?
Exactly. So what you just said is maybe confusing, but it's not, right? So Uniswap launched without a token. So here we're not even, again, we're just looking at the business and what's the problem that it's solving, right? When there's no mention of a token yet, really.
It's just a product, isn't it? It's just literally a service that is being provided and solving a problem. And in this current stage, we don't really care about if it has a token or not, right?
Right. Okay, so the problem statement and then value proposition and value creation. So
yeah, so the value proposition is pretty much that, right? It's a place for people who have liquidity to sort of share it with people who need liquidity, right? And that's somewhat like how value is created too, right? It's sort of like a marketplace for those two things to be connected. And then as that gets bigger and bigger, liquidity gets deeper and deeper, then you have like lower slippage. And then it's also obviously built on a trustless system, right? So anybody can, well, obviously, as we stated before, like in a decentralized manner, anybody can sort of do this without permission from anybody else or the Uniswap devs, anything like that, right? So I guess between those two things, you're sort of asking like, what is the unique selling point of the product, right? What is it? How is it solving it, so to speak? The value it's creating in doing that, and then what is, I guess, its competitive advantage? And I guess that is obviously as the liquidity gets deeper and deeper, then it's just going to be better for traders, right? And that obviously then makes it more attractive for LPs.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so problem statement, value proposition, value creation, and then
in the framework, maybe you just, there's like this other section to the side for those who don't see it, right, where you can then just go ahead and do that, answer that each of these steps for yourself. So we got this one example for Uniswap, and then for the others you can just go and do that. And yeah, maybe in the future, we've been talking about it, we're thinking about it, maybe add some additional protocols for reference. That'd be cool.
And then I guess like the last part in this business assessment is like growth and evolution, right? And so how will it sort of gain more value as it starts to be used? So pretty much they're all some sort of similar in some regard, but I mean, going through them methodically sort of brings out like maybe some flaws in thinking and whatnot. But obviously in the case of Uniswap, there isn't many flaws. It's a pretty verified product, so to speak. So obviously adding, the more liquidity there is, then the better, and then obviously the more I guess desire people have to sort of add more tokens, and then I guess the marketplace just gets bigger and bigger. And then with that, there's also this idea that maybe didn't occur to many people initially, but if you sort of are sort of an LP, you can also hedge risk, right? You can also have protection to a volatile token, simply by being an LP. And obviously this is like, has to be managed properly, but it's also something that many people do LP for, right? And I guess that's sort of how it's evolved over time. And obviously the initial reason for somebody to actually deposit liquidity, right, was obviously to gain yield on their like static assets, so to speak. So as more people sort of realize that rather than just holding Ethereum, they could LP, let's say ETH, I don't know, USDT or USDC, something like that, then you can have sort of like a yield rather than just simply holding a static asset. So that's sort of like how it's changed, grown, and sort of like evolved over time. Or I guess how you project it could, right?
Yeah. And there could be other things like, technological advancements, like, I don't know when they came up with that or how they did that, but they also have these hops where you can like trade between different tokens, and they try to find the way that has the lowest fees or lowest slippage. Yeah. All through that chain. Yeah. So I guess that could be stuff that you could put in there, right? Just like go through the roadmap, think about how your project will grow over time. And will gain value essentially. But don't look at the token in this first step. We don't want to talk about anything token here.
Yeah, it's not like it's going to grow because we're going to release a token.
Yeah.
That isn't an option for this. Right.
Right. Yeah. So exactly. So basically this is like your mini, I don't want to say business plan, but you're just trying to get super clear on the problem you're solving, the value creating, and how you can see it evolving over time, right? And then so that already helps many people, I think, identify problems in their idea. And then so next step would be token evaluation. So what goes on over here?
Yeah.
So
this is where you go, Mason.
Yeah. So I guess this is like where we sort of do ask, okay, so if you verified your product, so to speak, or your business like proposition, then we're going to sort of evaluate, does it make sense to have a token, right? So in the case of Uniswap, it's a good and bad example in the sense that, well, just because they had I guess, a viable product, like we said, for many years, they didn't have a token. So sort of going through some steps to sort of think about if you sort of need right, a token is actually needed is quite important, right? Before obviously thinking about the implementations of a token. Okay. So, but in the case of like Uniswap, again, it's a pretty poor example because literally they just sort of were forced into releasing their token, so to speak, because SushiSwap sort of like was vampire attacking them because they sort of released the token too. So I guess the way they went about it was, well, we sort of have to do it, and we're just gonna do it and get it over with. So we're gonna release it to LPs and then sort of like wean them off of it slowly, right? But I guess this doesn't really speak to, as in this example doesn't really speak to how you would sort of go about assessing if you sort of need a token yourself, right? So I guess this is where we sort of like think about, okay, so what is it that you're actually trying to do, right? So obviously community-based products do benefit quite a bit from a token simply because of the nature of tokens, right? How they sort of group people together and like can sort of align community incentives, right? So if you've got an understanding of what your business is going to do, right? Can well, first, obviously, what you should look at is it dependent on a community, right? And then if it is, then that's obviously a very strong factor to sort of think about, okay, so a token probably does make sense. Then we can sort of then look at, okay, so what are the, I guess, use cases for that in the system, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, tokens help to coordinate communities, but they also help kind of capture some of the value the community itself creates, right? So it's cool. But I mean, I guess
for them it might be the whole
go ahead.
governance, right? Of deciding what the product does. And I think that's what they now do. They have these, Uniswap proposals and people vote on it. And yeah, although maybe they didn't want it in the beginning, but now I guess they're using it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do,
I guess that's like, do you want sort of like it to be community owned is a very good point, isn't it? Like, is your goal to sort of to eventually get to that state?
right.
Yeah.
So I've been in
That's true.
consulting project with a Web2 company, and they were trying to evaluate if they could want to kind of be a technology partner, kind of launch a DAO with, with a purpose, solving a specific problem, but using their tech. And we kept coming back to, well, if you give it to a DAO, then they can eventually decide what to do with it. Like, are you sure you want that? Because that has implications of how you develop your tech further, right? And they're like, huh, that's a good point. Well, we kind of like our CEO to be in charge. So yeah, I mean, you have to be clear on the implications, right? So
Yeah.
this is great.
100%. Yeah.
Okay, so here we're going to number 3, users.
Yeah. So I guess users is probably the core piece. Like, it's like if you're building a business, you got to have some client, some customer, and or some users of your product. And so this is really what we're trying to look at is who are the people who are using the stuff that we're building. And we're going to go through a couple of different steps here, and we called it the circle model because it's a whole bunch of different circles, and we're trying to layer this circle from the inside out. So for those who are not watching this, only listening, it's kind of like in this FigJam file, there's this section with a whole bunch of huge circles that just get like wider and wider. And in these circles, you can fit your post-it notes, your notes that you have. And we'll start from the inside per user that we have identified. You could call them agents, you could call them personas, whatever. We just happen to call them users. So in the case of Uniswap, there's a liquidity provider, and we'll start from the inside out and just simply define what they do, the tasks they perform. So in the case of Uniswap, the liquidity provider, he provides liquidity, they set a price range, and they set fees. So that's what these guys do. And then it goes on from there. So we have like a whole bunch of circles adding to that. So the next question would be why they use the product. So we'd figured that out. And Mason already said it. For liquidity providers, it's mitigating risk, or it is also collecting fees on idle capital. And then we slowly move through this circle, and on the right hand side, like for your project, in the example, we've only given one. We've given an example for one user, but you would copy that for 3, 4, 5, whatever, how many users you have. So I'm doing this with a client right now, and we have, I think, like 5 different or 4 different circles. And they're full of post-its notes of stuff that they use, and we're exploring how they will interact, what value they add. That's kind of the next step then, where we think about like not only why they use the product, what do? They create an efficient market. They might provide this deep liquidity that attracts people on our side, on the other side, traders, to trade. Like if you have a lot of volume and you're trying to get away with low slippage, then you need deep liquidity. So that they both attract each other. So this is really what we're trying to evaluate with the users part. And the circle model, it ties into the next step. So step number 3 is users, and step number 4 is incentives. So we're going to use this circle model for both. We're going to use it for incentives, and we're going to use it for users. But if you maybe want to go back up to the users part, there are also some bonus steps. And Mason, you added them. Maybe you want to talk about these, because I think they're really important.
Yeah, definitely. So like just generally, like the third step obviously is, so if you do determine that you do need a token, right? The idea is that a token can provide great incentive to get sort of users to do what you want them to do, right? But unless you sort of have a general understanding of what it is they are coming and using your product for, you're not really going to be able to align those incentives, right? So this is the reason why, well, it's sort of split between 3 and 4, and also this is why we sort of think about these things first, right? As in, it's more user oriented rather than what do we want these people to do, you know, what do we want users to be doing. So the bonus steps sort of fit in between the steps that Flo mentioned, and sort of add like a bit more context, because, for example, you can, let's say, I don't know, you can sort of like get an understanding of what maybe a user wants to do and maybe says what they want to do. But then there's this tool that I guess we use called empathy maps, where you can sort of get a better, it's pretty much just more context on what a user may do, you know. So what do they think, what do they actually do, and then maybe what do they feel, right? So in the case of the example that we were talking about, so the liquidity provider, so yeah, they probably say that, as in if you were to ask them, and obviously that maybe depends on your product, can you actually ask some of your users or not? And some of this is going to be a bit hypothetical, but it is good to think through, right? So in the case of a liquidity provider on Uniswap, well, yeah, they want to gain yield on their assets, or maybe, yeah, mitigate risk, right? But then what are they thinking? Well, I mean, there's no sort of like loyalty, I guess you could say. I mean, they'll leave whenever they see best, right, fit for them. So if, for example, SushiSwap provides a better yield, well, they're just going to leave, right? And that's sort of like reflected in, I guess, the does category. So this empathy map is divided into 4 quadrants, right? It says, thinks, does, and feels. What does the user say, think, does, and feels? And then the thinks and does many times align, right? So they're thinking that, well, yeah, if there's going to be, yeah, Lovis is showing an example. Yeah, so if they are thinking that there's going to be a better yield somewhere else, they're probably going to go and do that, right? They're going to go and move their liquidity. And then the feels category is sort of like, yeah, so they're not loyal, you know, like they're literally thinking for themselves. So that was it's just like added context to sort of get a better understanding of what this user may or not may do or may not do, right? So that was the first one, and then the second one is this like behavioral insights, right? And the idea behind this is that we are like in designing tokenomics, we're very sort of accustomed to the reason for people participating in your product is because they want to gain financial incentives, like financial rewards. Okay, so obviously in the case of Uniswap, that is true. So an LP provides liquidity because they want to gain rewards, right? And that's fine, but there is also some cases where the financial rewards aren't, I guess, like the most important thing, but there's also this status or reputation, right? So I guess you could call them non-financial rewards, where people react to maybe gaining reputation or gaining status and don't really care about earning money, you know. So this is where we sort of get some important context, in the sense that if you're going to be incentivizing people to do behaviors that you want them to be doing, and you're just giving them money for it, but in reality they want status or reputation, well, it's not going to work very well, isn't it? It's like, if you don't want whatever I'm giving you, then you're just not going to do what I'm asking, right? So to speak. So we sort of like divide it into 2 types. You got financial rewards and then status and reputation. And then there's like more of a specific motivation, I guess you could say. There's this like loss aversion, which is people don't want to lose what they've already got. They don't want to miss out also, like maybe on, let's say, some opportunities. It could be anything, really. It depends on your product, obviously. There's also maybe the specific motivation of responsibility. So maybe what they're looking for, what motivates them, is to gain responsibility in your product. We can obviously see this like in DAOs, like a lot of people are interested in sort of like, I guess you could say, climb the ranks, so to speak. And then there's also this other option of like the realm of emotions, feelings, and experiences. And this one sort of maps very well to games, right? So people play games because there's an emotional payoff. Okay, so the specific motivation for them to do it is to, yeah, maybe play with friends, or maybe, yeah, I don't know, get to a certain achievement, you know. And that sort of, the reason they're playing is because of an emotional payoff. So maybe rewarding them financially doesn't really make sense in that case, you know. And then there's the last category, which is like this early adopter, which is yeah, I mean, it sort of makes sense, doesn't it? People sort of want to be early, and there's certain ways that we can sort of, if you understand that that's why people are here, then you can sort of incentivize certain, well, you can create sort of incentive schemas on top of that to sort of align what people want with what you're going to be giving them, right? So that was like the general idea of giving a bit more, like with these bonus steps, right? It's just get a better understanding of why the people are literally going to be using your product, in that you're not really going to be able to get them to do what you want them to do, right? As in align, if you don't understand that beforehand. And that's where step 4 comes in, which is the incentives, right?
Well, and it sounds like it will be very helpful if I were to launch something to just think through, who am I talking to, right? Who's my audience in a way? And
Yeah.
I get really clear on who am I building this for and what are the motivations. So yeah, I really like the bonus stuff. I actually hadn't seen that before.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. So I assume, so I mean, here we click to the map on an outside resource, and this other one was on a Notion page, but I assume this is all public, right? So anybody can access that via these links.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for walking us through that. So now for incentives. So now with all this knowledge and all this insight we've created about our users and their motivations, I think it makes logical sense that now we're going to see how can we incentivize to, I guess, what gets out certain highlight certain behaviors and maybe de-emphasize others. Is that kind of what's happening now?
Yeah. It's pretty much it's like the reason they're sort of included in the same, like this circle model that we sort of call it, is because I guess the one and the same. It's just that we like to divide it between sort of like, so understanding why the users are here, and then okay, so what do we want them to do? So it's step 3 is what do they want, and then step 4 is what do we want from them, right?
Okay.
Because the only way you're going to be able to align is understanding both. So the sort of the first step, and I guess like the red ring for people who are watching, is like, okay, so what do we want them to be doing, right? What tasks do we want them to be doing? And then what tasks do we not want them to be doing, right? So in the case of Uniswap, it's obviously we want them to be adding liquidity or keep or maintain their liquidity, right? And obviously that's the competitive advantage. And then what do we not want them to be doing? Well, it's obviously leaving, like removing that liquidity, or like having a high level of churn, as in, yeah, so maybe switching between multiple AMMs and whatnot, because that's not obviously good for our product. Yeah, and so I guess once you sort of identified the tasks, then you sort of say, okay, so how can we sort of incentivize or decentivize those two things, right? So in the case of Uniswap, again, it isn't a brilliant example because the token wasn't actually used for that, right? It was sort of after the fact. But the general idea for an AMM is, well, we're going to reward people for like being here, right? So for providing liquidity. And this is sort of like, we'll talk about why this is a problem in a later step. But yeah, I guess currently the reason people sort of maintain their LP on Uniswap is because they get a decent fee, right? Just for the swaps, the swap fee. So
and this doesn't have to do anything with the token, right? This could be other stuff that incentivizes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's sort of why it's important to go through the previous steps to sort of figure out. I mean, I don't think we mentioned it, but like after step 2, even if you answer no, right, even after the token evaluation, if you sort of like come out of it and say, well, I don't really need a token, it doesn't mean that you have to stop, right? Because you sort of can still have a community-based project or business that still works, right? I mean, it doesn't have to sort of be like you finish there.
Yeah. Well, of course. I mean, otherwise Reddit wouldn't work, right? Or other community-based products wouldn't work if you always had to have a token. The token.
Yeah, there could be mechanisms in place, right? That like our own DAO mechanisms where we distribute part of the consulting revenue to content creation. That has nothing to do with the token, but it's still a mechanism in a way that incentivizes people to do stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing, like that's where a token just enhances things. You know, I mean, we're very used to a token being just a financial reward, But in reality, I mean, what does any project or business want? I mean, or a network, they want engagement, they want retention from users, right? So having sort of mechanisms in place don't necessarily need to be token based, right? But there doesn't need to be like an incentive, an understanding of what you can sort of incentivize people based on like what you want them to do and not do, right? So from there, so when you've got an understanding, just going back to the example, so obviously you, well, yeah, I mean, again, Uniswap isn't a good example, but so let's say you understand that, okay, so if I want people to stick around, provide liquidity, well, I'm going to incentivize them with some tokens, right? So what is a mechanism that sort of like actually is like, I guess you could call it the implementation of that incentive, right? And I guess it's like, well, using an example. So it's you're sort of bootstrapping liquidity by paying people to sort of provide liquidity, right? So if you do this, I'm going to pay you for it, right? Now, it's interesting because that has problems, and this is where like the last step in sort of this like circle model comes in. It's sort of thinking about, okay, so the mechanisms that we've sort of talked about, what sort of side effects can they have, and maybe what can we fix, right?
Yeah, I think this is where, yeah, maybe Uniswap isn't that bad, because I think they did this fairly well. Right? They came up with this mechanism. They're like, okay, we will have a token, and so what will the mechanism for that token for liquidators providers will be? Well, we're going to give them some tokens, reward them for providing early liquidity. So this then bootstraps this system where we need a lot of liquidity to enable low slippage, and low slippage will then attract traders that will then pay the liquidity providers. So that's always with this kind of marketplace. You need something that helps you to bootstrap it. But the problem, I think that's what a lot of protocols face, is how do you, like, they're really good at the cold start problem, like solving that, but how do you stop after you've started, right?
Exactly.
It's like,
yeah
get them off
your
that
moat,
cocaine as quickly as possible.
like your moat can't be your token as in the moat, like the reason for people for using your protocol or the product can't be because you're being paid. It's because of, I guess, the business assessment, like what we answered in that stage, isn't it? Like you use Uniswap either because it's low slippage, you're a trader, or if you're an LP, you're getting a decent amount of yield based on fees, right? But it's not because you're being paid with a token, because if you do go down that route, then I mean, there's always going to be somebody who's going to be able to pay more because they're just maybe launching and they've got a new token, and you just get to this mercenary liquidity problem.
Whenever you run out of tokens, right?
They just throw. You're right. They just throw outside money at it, right? So get some funding that has nothing to do with the value creation of the product. But it's not sustainable, right? So then people start just being tourists for these protocols.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And that's where I think this step is really good, right? So you kind of come up with the mechanism first, and then you add these side effects, like what problems could come out of that. And in this case, it's really this: if we keep doing this for too long, people will only be here for that. So we have to see if this works rather like sooner than later. And find out if they're here for the real yield that they get from the traders.
Definitely.
Okay. Yeah. And so maybe then, like, so for this circle model, right, in this example here, and for the people only listening, like the why I like this is you start with nodes, with these post-it notes from the inside, and they just order them in some way. But then when you move to the outer layers, you'll have topics that relate to each other, right? You'll have some you'll have some task that a user performs, and that then relates to some why they use the product. So it's kind of cool, because then you can follow this train of initial thought and evolve it more and more until you get to the very outer layer. So in ones that are a bit more complex than our example here, we'd have like post-it note trails going into all sorts of directions, because they're kind of connected. So to me, you could add lines between the post-its, but I'm too lazy for this. So I just put them into like close proximity, I guess. so that people can see these are kind of related to each other.
Yeah, because there will be mechanisms that sort of like relate to different problems, I guess, or different tasks that users are sort of doing. And that's sort of like the reason why it's a circle and not just like a simple like table, right? Because it just doesn't, a table doesn't allow for this, you know, it's maybe a lot bigger than the table, but it does make sense. But yeah, feedback is always good.
Well, I mean, luckily, space on Infinity whiteboards is cheap, so it can be as big as it wants to be, whatever's practical, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you guys walked me through the circle model all the way from the inside to the outside. So we did mechanism design, and then, okay, so I guess now we're trying to pour. So what happens here? We're trying to pour what we learned in the circle into a kind of an easier overview format or something.
Yeah, and try and summarize it, because I think the circle model will get quite messy, because to me it's really about this of like throwing ideas at it, collaborating with the team, just throwing everything at it, get really creative. And so this is taking stock in a way of what have we done and what are the ones that are really relevant, that we have vetted, and that seem to make sense here. And so you can add a few of these here. We've got these cards with a few prompts that will ask you some questions in terms of like, where do the tokens come from? Is this mechanism a sink or a source? So this is something we've borrowed from game design, right? So there, a sink is something that takes tokens away out of circulation, or puts them, like holds them temporarily, which could be something like demand. And a source, would be wherever the tokens come from. And so we have a whole bunch of different questions that we're asking here, where people can like try and refine their mechanism, think through them a little bit deeper. And once we have that, or that's at least what I like to do. Some people might not want to do that or don't like it, but I recommend creating such a diagram. Like for me, at least, it helps to map it out and visualize it, explain it to others, what we're thinking of. And
it also helps to get like an idea of like the token flow, especially with the next step that we'll talk about. It does help quite a bit. And maybe like the non-visual learners won't like it as much, but it is useful for quite a lot of people, I guess.
So to create a diagram, we've got a template there to do it. And I guess like a piece of critique that we would get for this design framework so far is that there's no modeling on what the mechanism specifically does. And we're aware of that. We're working on it. The problem is just, if you want to DIY this stuff, I guess it's incredibly hard to do. And we haven't found any good resources that allow people to use this in a simple way. So maybe in the future, if we find something, or if you have something, please share that with us. We'll have some maybe like simple spreadsheets that you can use to calculate your mechanisms. We just usually just get into a spreadsheet and just dump some numbers in there, play around with that a little bit to see what makes sense.
I mean, in consulting, we're using some basic supply and demand modeling, but it's mostly about kind of the setup values, I want to say, right? So it's like you try to define what's your initial condition, and then modeling tries to go beyond that, but that's very difficult. That you go deep into data science. So I think it makes sense that this is not included in a free framework that we're putting together.
If we could, I'd love to, but I haven't found, like, there's CAD that I think the Token Engineering Commons makes, but you got to know how to do, I don't know, Python, and you have to be really familiar with this kind of stuff. So you can't just come in and do this real quick. It's just too difficult. And I think, like, to be honest, we said this pre-recording, I hope, but we said this, I think it's otherwise I would be repeating, but it's like there's so many tokens that have probably done modeling and modeled the crap out of everything, but still failed. And I think a big reason for why they failed is because they haven't looked at the business model and how their value creation of their business then ties back to the token. So maybe let's focus a bit more on that than get too crazy about modeling. And if you really want modeling, there's lots of people out there that can do it. But yeah, I guess this brings us to token value accrual.
Yeah.
Right? Because here we want to bring this balance between supply and demand and find out how our token collects some of that value or accrues some of that value that we've created.
Okay, so how do we do that?
So like, I guess off of step 4, you're sort of thinking about mechanisms that are going to be sort of distributing tokens, right, for certain behaviors. So we've identified what people want, we've identified what we want, we've thought about mechanisms that sort of align those two things, right? And then obviously those mechanisms are going to be distributing some form of reward, right? So in many cases, obviously a token. So how do we sort of think about, okay, so how are we going to like, is there going to be a mismatch there, right? Is there, because if you distribute things to people, it doesn't specifically, like there's no, you have to sort of think about the demand, right? Like why would there be reason for somebody to buy it or hold it, right? Now, simply because you're giving it to somebody doesn't mean they're going to want it, doesn't mean they're going to hold it. And if they can sell it, they probably will, right? If there's no real reason for sort of holding it. So this is where we sort of think about how are we going to maybe balance the two, right? So balance the supply that we're sort of distributing to people, and then how we're going to think about the demand that's going to back or absorb that supply. Okay, so the 5.1 taking stock, right, is literally that. So we're thinking about, okay, so what the mechanisms that we've previously identified, they're probably going to be supply mechanisms in that they are sort of rewarding users for certain tasks, certain activities. There could be examples of demand mechanisms at this stage, and I guess you could add them. It isn't that normal, but it can be. There can be a situation where you've created a demand mechanism in stage 4. But yeah, we're sort of thinking about, so how is the supply being distributed in this first stage, right? And then what can we sort of think about, sort of, I guess, balance the two, right? So distribution of tokens would be supply, and then removal or requirement of tokens would be demand, okay? So these two steps sort of go in tandem in that you're thinking about the balance between both of them. And like we said, there's no modeling here, so it's not going to be a quantitative thing. It's more getting an understanding of where there could be a mismatch between the two, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's sort of one way that the token is going to reflect the value created by whatever it is the users are doing, right?
Yeah, and then you can still take that and put that into a spreadsheet if you want to suss out sort of, yeah, how much supply, how much demand something would create if you can.
Yeah.
Right. So, but the output here on the board is distribution of tokens, removal, requirement of tokens. So you're trying to just make a list of potential supply and demand factors, or
mechanisms, right?
Yeah.
So the mechanisms that we created above, we're trying to transfer them down here.
Okay.
Exactly.
And think about which of them like introduce or distribute tokens, put them into supply, and which remove them or like require them or make people hold them, right? Because if you have like a staking mechanism, for instance, that's not really removal of tokens. They're still there, and people could withdraw them from staking anytime. So they could be reintroduced, but stuff that kind of creates demand for the token generally on the mechanism side. So we're trying to start with that. It's taking stock.
Or for example, in like the removal requirement section, if you sort of identify that one of your users doesn't want to say miss out on, let's say, whatever information your product is producing, right? It's like loss aversion. Well, maybe you've created a mechanism above that sort of says, okay, well, there's going to be a requirement of X amount of tokens to sort of have access to this information, and because they don't want to miss out, because they sort of that's what they're here for, right? They're going to sort of buy. Well, it's I guess you could say they're more aligned with maybe buying those tokens, holding them to sort of get what they want. So that is, I guess, the idea of like the requirements of tokens part in there. It's a demand, right?
Yeah.
So in the case of Uniswap, the only supply that sort of they had was, I guess, this early rewards given out to like liquidity providers. So like I said, I mean, they're giving it out to them, but what is the reason they're going to hold it? Like, so if imagine you're an LP, and so all of a sudden Uniswap is distributing tokens to you just because you've been an LP, right? I mean, you didn't sign up for being an LP because of the token. You literally were doing it because you wanted, let's say, the fees, right? So now you've got an extra token, that extra income that you're sort of thinking, well, do I want this? Should I just sell it? So this is where, in the case of Uniswap, it's quite interesting because the demand for the token is, I don't know how you sort of name it, but it's a bit vague. It's sort of this governance, isn't it, over the treasury, which is also denominated in uni, so it's a bit weird. But it's I guess also a bit speculative. So people are sort of speculating that if you sort of own this Uniswap token, then when they do turn on this supposed fee switch, which will distribute revenue to, I guess, the treasury, then you're going to be entitled to a percentage of that, right? Because currently there's no other, I guess, demand for the token, right? It doesn't do anything else.
Yeah, it lets you vote, but it only lets you vote over the treasury that they have filled out of the Genesis supply.
Yeah.
Right? So it's their own printed money that they've put into their treasury, and you can decide what happens to that printed money. So
yeah,
it's weird,
not actual.
Right? So
it's not like it's not protocol governance, is it? It's like they can't vote. Like holders can't vote on what they want Uni V4 to look like.
I don't know how far that goes, but yeah, I'm not an expert on that, but yeah, they can decide how to distribute that treasury of uni tokens.
Yeah,
mind you, right? So yeah.
So I guess in that
speculation.
Yeah, so there's obviously speculation there, and then there's this governance factor over their own printed money, so over the treasury, which is denominated in uni, right? So I guess those are the two main demand drivers, the main demand factors for the token, and then obviously there's only one of the one that we mentioned for supply. Now, and that's fine, obviously. So you just get a general sense of, the idea is to get a general sense of, okay, so is that balanced? Is it not balanced? Again, it's qualitative, it's not quantitative. But a good example is the Ethereum EIP 1559, which they sort of implemented right after the fact to sort of equal these two things, right, a bit better, like monetary policy. And obviously, we've seen that it's had sort of a pretty good effect on token price, or value accrual, I guess you could say. And then, well, I forgot to mention, but basically, this in thinking about demand, reasons for people to buy and hold the token, I guess there's two types, right? You've got the internal and then the external. So external would be like this EIP 1559 monetary policy type thing, where it's literally it's an external factor, right, or market forces, I guess you could say. And then you've got the internal stuff, which is pretty much utility, right? So in the case of Uniswap, it's governance. So the reason they're gonna buy and hold it is because they have voting rights over the treasury.
Yeah, and here you might come up with like, oh, I think we don't have enough demand drivers. We need to think through some more utilities for the token, or maybe some external ones to balance out.
Yeah.
So this is then, that's kind of what we want out of this section 5, generally.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there is something that we've not added here, is that I think to create proposals, you do have to have a certain amount of uni. And I think it's something absurd, like 2.5 million tokens. So I guess there is somewhat of a flaw, so to speak, involved in this, and that, I guess, it's part of utility. It's partly internal, isn't it?
Yeah, I think like governance is always is like in between, sort of.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Well, so
yeah.
okay, and you guys also enclose a bunch of resources basically on the topic, right, of demand drivers. So some really good articles. I've read several of those.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the
That's good stuff. Yeah.
new person digging into this, definitely highly recommend. So to take a look at these links provided.
And we also have like there's a Tokenomics 101 article on Uniswap that we've written. So to give you maybe more context around
it's
it.
yeah, I think it's linked here
up in the upper right corner somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, here it is.
There it is. You're almost there. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
cool. Okay, so we've figured out our token value accrual. Try to balance supply and demand, and so now we're going into number 6, distribution. So what's distribution?
Well, because there's something missing, right? We've done the mechanisms, and the mechanisms show us how to distribute tokens on some level, on like what generates supply. Maybe we want to incentivize a group of people here. We want to incentivize a group of people there. Maybe there's some other utility that takes tokens out of supply, whatever. You've come up with all these things. But in most cases, you're going to use your token also as a form of payment, raising money or raising time. And so think that's kind of, this is the step where you want to think about that, right? How much do you have to give to your investors, your VC, so that they're happy? How much does your team want? What's like the grand sum of all the stuff, all the mechanisms that you've calculated in the previous step, on like how many tokens you need to get to who?
Yeah,
so
and like
we've got
what's fair too. I guess.
Yeah, exactly. What's fair? Yeah. So there's some good resources here on what others have done. You can look into that. And then on the right side, so this one, maybe if you go up a little bit, Lovis, this is a little bit different, because this is, here we'll get away from like dragging around post-its and come up with ideas. Here we really need to get into a spreadsheet. And so we have created this spreadsheet, and it's really basic, right? You can define all the holders of the token and also define the percentages of how many tokens they would get. You can come up with like a total number of tokens that you want to give away. And yeah, that's really the super simple of it in this step that we're going to do. Yeah. And then all of that stuff that you're scrolling through that right now, Lovis is kind of scrolling through the spreadsheet. There's a whole bunch of other things like we've tried to add some templates if you wanted to go about mapping supply and demand. We're going to vesting, but most of that is step 6.2, which is which we call timing and emission schedule. And so in this step, if you think back to the supply and demand map, right, the piece where we tried to balance supply and demand, what was missing in the supply and demand map is time, because supply and demand will both evolve over time, right? You'll have tokens trickling out over time to your investors because you might, or you hopefully will be able to talk them into some sort of vesting scheme, so you can protect yourself from tokens being dumped early on. And you can allow your ecosystem to grow, because like, let's say you're starting a marketplace, you won't get to the 100 million users that you want straight away. That will take some time. And so this is really about trying to bring in this time aspect. How long is it going to take until all of these demand mechanisms have evolved or unfolded over time? And how long does it take for all of your supply mechanisms to have evolved over time? And the end result is really, in most cases, just this vesting schedule, right? Will show us the vesting schedule and maybe some other mechanisms or some deeper specifications of your mechanisms on how quickly they will release your tokens, right? So Mason, I've just read your article that isn't published yet on Convex, right? And they've got this mechanism how they distribute tokens based on, I think, how many curve tokens they hold, right? Or how much revenue they get from curve tokens.
Yeah, it's based on the CRV that they earn, right? Based on the LPs that they have, that people
Yeah.
deposit into
Yeah.
Convex. So that's
So there's
different,
all sorts
obviously.
of different ways,
Yeah,
on how you can do this or how this can be linked to whatever.
yeah.
Yeah. And again, like if you take the spreadsheet here, look into that. There's, we just try to, the minimum would be you go and take all the different groups that you give tokens to. Like there might be a pool for rewards of your incentives. There might be a pool for investors and for team and for community and all that. And you sort of think through how or what the general ways of unlocking and distributing these tokens would be. And there's a good resource here. It's called the Optimal Vesting Schedule, where someone has analyzed that from a whole bunch of VCs and token launches on how they've done vesting. So yeah, this is a pretty good resource to get an idea of how others have done it. So you can kind of take that as a range on where to start. But then once, like, that would be the minimum thing that we'd like you to do in this, or that you should be doing in this, is think through how you would supply. But then if you want to get a bit more fancy, you could look into demand and try and match the demand against that over time. Now, this is going to be really tricky, especially for stuff like demand from governance. Like, who knows what that will create? But you can make some assumptions and guess, just to get a better understanding, and then maybe have different scenarios, to get a bit closer to what you think could work.
Yeah, I guess this is where it's another instance of where modeling could come in, right? And you're always going to have, like you say, uncertainties in, you don't know how much speculation is going to be around your token and how much demand that's going to create for it. But you can sort of model, I guess, the internal demand based on the utility. Like if your token is very currency-like, and let's say Link, for example, you can sort of base that. You can get an idea off of what that is going to look like, right? Based on some models.
How many people need Oracle services, right, per month, and that how much demand for the token will that create? Yeah.
Okay, so when are these examples here with these graphs, are they meaningful to anything, or they're just example that you pasted in here?
Yeah, they're just example. We just made some stuff up to show that this would kind of show like an evolution of demand versus supply. And if you can get the numbers right, or you get an understanding for the numbers, this can be helpful.
Really cool. Yeah, I think it's very helpful. It's very helpful, at least in getting the initial assumptions right, because I think there's still plenty of projects that launch, forget about an unlock period or a vesting schedule, and
have them too short or have them too long.
Give early investors like a crazy pre-seed evaluation is really cheap, and then what ends up happening is that they just bleed out over time because investors keep selling with high profits and everybody else is left holding the bag, so to say.
Yeah, and it also sort of like affects your token value accrual, right? If you get this wrong, they're sort of linked, so to speak. If you get it wrong, it's going to affect that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you oversupply, I mean, but I guess, is it fair to say you always want to rather have too little tokens in circulation than too many, right? If you had to make an error, better to have too few, because it should be better for nominal price of the token, if that's your goal. Okay, cool. So we've figured this out. Yeah, I know.
Bootstrapping mechanism, but
timing and emission schedule, got the template there, got some really good resources. And so now we're going to token launch. So now it's getting exciting. So what's applied here?
Yeah, I guess this is thinking about the number of tokens, right? Getting back to how many tokens you want to launch. Like, to me, it's mostly optics, right? And then you think about the price that you want to launch. at. And that's also probably optics, right? The market cap that you want to launch at is probably also has to do with optics, right? So maybe you want to launch at 100 million market cap. And so you set a token price, what you want to start at. And then you you kind of have your number of tokens, and that then adds up to that number. And then you think about like, how much liquidity do I need for this, right? On a decentralized exchange, if I'm going to only trade on decentralized exchanges, or how much do I need on centralized exchanges? Now, I guess on different exchanges, there's different ways they do it. Like if you get to launch on Binance, they're going to provide liquidity for you, but they're going to do some very thorough investigation into what you're doing before they're going to launch your token. They wouldn't launch anything like Luna or something like that. Just kidding. But that's kind of stuff you look into, right? So you would, things that you could do. You go to like Uniswap and look at a token that has kind of a market cap that you want to target, and you look at what the liquidity is that they've provided, and then you can sum up all the different liquidity pools that offer their token. You can maybe go to a couple of other exchanges. Yeah, and then you can kind of sum that up, and then you can derive from that how many tokens you need, right? But at this stage, if you're not, like, if you're kind of doing this on your own, I think it'd be worth getting in maybe your VC or a market maker to help you suss this out a little bit, and figure this out in a bit more detail.
Yeah, because if you have, for example, like depending on how much the percentage you want to release of your token allocation, it can sort of depend on, I guess, the amount of liquidity you're sort of pairing that with, right? So if you don't have much liquidity to sort of pair your token with, then it could allow for, I guess, whales to come in and like gain a disproportionate amount of the allocation, right? And it would be less distributed. So like, I guess it's sort of based off of the fully diluted valuation. So if you have, let's say, 100K worth of liquidity, like USDC or whatever it is, and you're going to release 10% of your tokens, well, that's an FTV of like 1 million, right? So it isn't that, in the crypto space, it isn't that big, right? And if somebody comes in and buys a chunk of that, well, they could get a decent amount of the allocation. And if that comes with governance rights, then that can be a problem.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Okay, so this section helps you think that through to some degree. I mean, that's probably even people that have launched before, because this is something you really only do a few times, right? Token launches don't happen that often. Like all the work going before and after, I guess most people are much more familiar with, or it feels more doable, but thinking this stuff through is pretty tricky. So I like Flo's advice, like see if you can get a market maker or VC to
talk to your doctor.
Talk this through, right? Cool.
Definitely.
Awesome. And then I see our last point is light paper. So light papers are, you know, I know that we produce a lot of these for clients. And so what's included here in the framework?
Yeah, it's pretty much just the recommendation to use our template to document everything, because that's something that got us started on this. All of this, right, is because tokens and the mechanisms and the tokenomics are not well documented. They're in fact like terribly documented. So every single time you look into a token and you try to figure out what their business model is, how the token works, it's just a pain. I've only seen a few that have documented that well, where you could understand what it actually was that was behind this. So this is what we are trying to get people to do, to write this down. Not only, you know, it's really important. Investors want to see it. They probably, users want to see it. Other builders would be super interested in that. So this, if you filled out the whole tokenomics design framework in this light paper template, there are yellow highlighted sections that will tell you which section to fill out if you've gone through the framework. So it's really quite simple. You've done all the work. So now just copy it in there and write it out a little bit, make it look nice, and then publish it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean,
And
you've
so
gone through
that's, yeah.
this entire thing for your understanding. So if you've had to go through it to understand what you're trying to do, right, then it just makes sense that, I mean, people that are going to want to invest or just understand the product, they're going to have to go through some form of, I guess, similar structure, right?
Yeah.
Because that could just
Exactly.
be a big barrier otherwise
Yeah.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
documentation.
So cool, guys. Good job on creating the framework. I mean, we've talked about it now for almost an hour and 15 minutes, I think. So it's very in depth, right? It really helps you step through the phases of thought, I guess, that have to go into getting clarity on your business value creation, and then figuring out your mechanisms and see how you can tie this all together with a token, balancing your supply and demand, figuring out your distribution. And then at the end, don't put this good work in the closet, put it in a light paper and publish it. And this framework will literally take you by the hand and walk you through this the whole way. I can't stop scrolling around because it's so cool. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for walking us through this and giving us the examples. I think that's super helpful in understanding how to use this and what it's good for and who it's relevant for. Do you guys have any closing thoughts you want to share?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously try it out. And if you have feedback, in the Discord is, I don't think we have a link to the Discord in here, do we? On the Figma, the Fig Jam. But yeah, definitely try it out. And if you see any problems or things that you change or things you do differently, we're all ears.
Yeah, we're really interested in evolving this to get this and keep this up to date so that this will be useful also in a year's time. It won't just sit there and gather to collect dust, right? We want to keep this relevant.
Yeah.
So please tell us what you liked, what you have changed, and we'll see if we can fit it in. And also, if you want to contribute, of course, join us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and then
happy.
As said in the intro, right? So if you're somewhere halfway in this process and you're feeling overwhelmed, reach out and ask for help, right? The community is there for you. Cool.
This podcast was not financial or tax advice. This channel is strictly educational and is not investment advice or a solicitation to buy or sell any assets or to make any financial decisions. This video is not tax advice. Talk to your accountant, do your own research. None of this is legal advice. This podcast is strictly educational. Talk to your lawyer.